unbelievable.
Hey everybody, what's up and welcome back to Eggs, the podcast. Today's special guest is James Atkin, lead singer for the band EMF, calling in from jolly old England. How are you, James?
Really good. Thank you for asking me on, Ryan.
Absolutely. Thrilled to death to have you. And a big part of this, I mean, obviously we're jacked to have you for numerous reasons, but there's a big tour that you guys are getting ready to kick off. You're going to be heading out starting June 14th with the band Spacehog and touring the United States. So I'm really excited to talk a little bit about the tour and to sort of get people caught up on what's going on with EMF these days. But let's maybe start a little bit at the beginning. For people who don't know or maybe do know, you guys are obviously really well known for a song called Unbelievable. But there's a lot of interesting stuff in and around that era of your career. So let's maybe go back in time a little bit and just sort of talk about the early days of EMF getting started and maybe that first big break.
Okay, so I hope I get the dates right. In 1991, our first single, we released a record called Unbelievable. And just by chance, luck, I don't know what it was, but it was really successful in the United States. We spent a lot of time coming over to America. We used to do 6-week tours on a sleeper bus, playing lots of cities all the way across America, up and down. And it was quite hard work, but we worked at it. And then as we were actually there, I think it might have been the third time we were there on the big tours, it actually went up the Billboard and it hit number one, which is incredible for a British band.
Yeah, it is incredible.
It's quite amazing for us.
Well, especially in that time frame, right? So let's let's maybe even go back a little earlier and talk about just sort of what led to that. So obviously the song Unbelievable has, it's everywhere. It's in commercials, it's in ads, it's got a whole life of its own. And really, I think I read that it's the 37th year, which I think makes me really old, but then again, it might make you even older. So I'll be sensitive around that topic. But because I practiced it, let's talk about sort of the formation of the band in Gloucestershire.
Okay.
I will have I did say Gloucestershire a million times.
Really well, not Gloucester.
I practiced.
Okay. So Gloucester is situated in the west. It's called the West Country. It's the west of England. We're actually from a place called the Forest of Dean, which is in Gloucestershire or Gloucestershire. And we were 5 school friends who got together. We'd all been at school together, playing in bands. Ian, the guitarist, lived just up the road in the city of Gloucester. We were kind of more in the rural part of Gloucestershire. We put a band together and did a few gigs, not many gigs, got signed by a record label and then put on the road to success. And it was quick, and it was a bit of a whirlwind those first few years.
Yeah, no, one of the things I think is particularly interesting is there's this weird story that I read in preparing for this about Unbelievable. And like you said, all this really happened really quickly for you guys. And so, but I mean, obviously for people who know that song and we'll have led off the show with a clip from it so people know what we're talking about. But it's got some sort of iconic sounds and noises and things in it. And some of those samples come from other places. For example, there's a bit from a famously unpopular Andrew Dice Clay record that's in there and some things like that. But somehow, despite being really new and despite just getting on the road, like you guys were able to clear samples like that. Like how did you get that?
Well, the Andrew Dice Clay one, that is pretty wild because we were actually in LA. We were staying at the Hyatt's, the Riot's house, and next to there was the Comedy Store. And then just by chance, we hadn't released Unbelievable at that point. I think we were over there being wine and dined by a couple of record labels, but we saw Andrew Dice Clay walk across the, I'm going to say car park, but you call it a parking lot, don't you? And then we just thought, wow. And we ran over to him and says, look, we've got this song. We've sampled you. We had this old cassette. I think Derry, one of the band members, had a cassette and we used to listen to it. And we cut it up, used it in the song. But just by the chance, we met Andrew Dice Clay and he went, yeah, guys, go and use it. Just clear it with, I think he was signed to Def Jam, Rick Rubin. So we contacted Rick Rubin's office, just says, Andrew Dice Clay says we could use this. And it was just a stroke of luck, really. I mean, I think in hindsight, and they might have had something to say because it went on to become massive and a real sort of, it's a big part of the song. But I know for a fact that Andrew Dice Clay thinks that the song was written about him, but we'll let him have that.
No, I love that. Well, I love that Rick Rubin connection, and I might have my history screwed up a little bit, but I think that the Rick Rubin produced Andrew Dice Clay album, I think, is basically he just went in unprepared to a comedy club and did a bit that went over terribly. And like, I guess the record itself didn't really do all that well, except for that it was Andrew Dice Clay and all that stuff, but it's produced by this epic guy, Rick Rubin. So it's this kind of hilarious bit of history. And then the fact that you guys were able to put it all together like that is awesome.
I know, it's strange, isn't it? It's such a strange thing. And it works so well. I'm so glad we found that sample and we got to use it. I think the record would be slightly different if it didn't have that. Whoa, what the? And we did cut out the F words in it. So the original recording, Andrew Dice Clay album, is full of like bad language.
Yeah, it's colorful for sure. Yeah. No, I love that. So, I mean, part of or I guess one of the things to maybe talk about is, so with that whirlwind changed, right? I mean, like, for people who listen to this show regularly, I mean, obviously we talk a lot about business and we always joke about the 10-year overnight success, right? Which is this idea that people spend, seemingly have this overnight success, but actually they laid a lot of groundwork prior to, finding that success. But with you guys, you actually, you all dabbled around in music and obviously you were talented musicians by the time you got to Unbelievable. But I don't think any of you could have been prepared for how quickly that became like a global sensation. Like just most businesses have time to grow and adapt, but you guys went from no product to like number one product. So can you talk a little bit about just sort of how that, what that experience was like for you guys, especially as young guys at the time?
Yeah, I mean, it was really quick. I mean, certainly in the UK, it was very quick because the record label, Parlophone, put us on the road straight away. And we were supporting this artist, but in the space of 2 or 3 weeks, they obviously got their machine into work and we were getting lots of press and lots of magazines and it kind of happened really quick. It was a little bit different in America because it's such a vast country. We had to go out there and we had to tour, but the tour, it wasn't just like, oh, we're going to have to do some gigs. We actually turn up in a city. We'd have to meet the record label reps. We'd have to go and do a signing at a record store. We'd have to go and do all the radio. We'd have to do a meet and greet before the gig. We'd do the gig, meet and greet after the gig, and then probably an after show party. And then back on the bus and do it all again. And we did that for like a few times, 6-week trots. We were young and we had energy and we could kind of do this. I mean, so it was a case of, we did have to work it and we did build it. It wasn't a case of, oh, we've just turned up in your country and, it's gone massive. We did have to do a lot of work, and I'm going to say it was exhausting, but it was so much fun as well. So, it wasn't really...
Well, yeah. And I mean, I can empathize too. I mean, I've been on the road and I've been, especially with the smaller bands I've worked with over the years. And I've spent years in, touring the country in like little, vans, not even the big sleeper rigs or whatever. And so, I mean, it is hard work and it's definitely a younger person's game. I don't sleep in vans too often anymore, but I mean, still what an exciting time for you guys. So one of the things too, or there's another funny story, or I don't know if it's funny, but it's a story that I don't think would have happened without the success of Unbelievable, which is you guys had another song on the album Schubert Dip called Lies. And originally it featured a clip of Mark Chapman, the guy who killed John Lennon. It had a clip of him in the song. So that ended up becoming quite scandalous. And, I guess that involved Yoko and everybody got upset and it was a whole thing. But like, something like that might have flown under the radar if it wasn't for your instant fame or sort of, well, quote unquote, instant fame, right? Rise to fame quickly. So because of that popularity, you were given, or, suddenly you found yourself, everybody loves us, but now everybody hates us. And what was that like for you guys, just even in terms of just sort of ego, emotion, et cetera? You guys went from being these darlings who had this hit that everybody was in love with. And now all of a sudden you're in the papers. And I have to imagine in England, there's a little bit of, extra energy around that story.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, we didn't think of the consequences because we used to just sample and chop lots of stuff up and put it on records. It was kind of strange when Yoko came knocking, and the issue was, and I mean, it was probably not a great idea to do it anyway, and it's probably not, thinking about it, probably wouldn't do that now, be a bit more, cautious, a bit more delicate now. But the issue was Mark Chapman, who was John Lennon's killer, he was actually reciting some John Lennon lyrics. So that's where the problem was. So obviously she owns the copyrights and the Lennon estate. So she actually sued us because we were using the property of John Lennon rather than the issue of, it was quite sick
Interesting.
sampling Mark Chapman. But it was actually because he was saying John Lennon's lyrics that got us. Or else we probably might have got away with it. Yeah, and do you know what? I don't really remember too much hate. Probably didn't notice. I'll have to be a little bit careful now if I head down to Liverpool.
Well, it's certainly a different time too, right? I mean, if you'd have had, the social media people like we do today, I imagine, you probably could be more exposed or feel that backlash a little more, maybe back in your hometown, it was difficult to see the papers every day or something.
Yes, I think you're right. Probably get cancelled now, wouldn't I? Just like a big storm on social media. Yeah, it was different times. And there was so much else going on, you know what I mean? It was kind of just another thing. It's funny though, I haven't thought about that for, I'm going to say 37 years, but I think it can't be 37 years.
Yeah. Well, the reason I bring it up is, one of the things that comes up on the show, or it's kind of a recurring theme, is people dealing with risk in their businesses. And for a musician or an artist, risk is kind of part of the thing, right? And maybe as an artist, you don't think of it as risk, but you make edgy decisions, or you do things that are maybe on the periphery of what's sort of acceptable, or you do things, maybe even it's just even in your own way, because you're the artist and you're expressing yourself in a certain way. And so artists tend to have sort of a risk aversion, right? They end up putting themselves out and doing these things that are a little edgy. And so I just wondered if that experience changed the way that you guys operated at all, or maybe hindered your riskiness or your willingness to kind of put yourself out there in a way that maybe didn't show up so much on the second album, as it's sort of a departure from the first record.
Yes. I don't think we were thinking about risks or what would happen if we did certain things. I don't think at that point it was our problem. It was more like the record label's problem, which, eventually we stopped selling records and they couldn't risk putting any more money into us. And that's their risk, isn't it? And that's why we kind of, by the time we got to the third album, we spent so much money recording it, going off to the south of France and editing in big studios. They wouldn't take the risk anymore. I don't know. I think maybe it was a strange one. I think now, these days, I think we know we're not going to sell millions of records, and when me and Ian sit down and write a song, we don't try to write a hit record anymore. We just write music for ourselves. So there's a certain, we don't care so much.
Yeah, I would imagine that the pressure has probably changed a little bit, for sure.
Well, it has, but we're kind of, going back to the business, I know it's a business podcast. It's kind of liberating these days, where we are our own record label. We're our own marketing company. We're our own press company. We even, master the records, record the records here. And so it's very much a cottage industry now, which it wasn't before, which has got its drawbacks, but it's certainly very, like I say, liberating. It's very cool that you can just do it all yourself, and we can write a song. And the last two albums we put together ourselves. We got a producer in on the last album, my friend Ralph, but it's very much a homegrown thing. And if I swung the camera around now, you'd see all the merch boxes and all the envelopes, and it's a business, which is quite funny, isn't it? And it's our business now, which it wasn't before. It was the record labels, and we were just young kids and we didn't know any better anyway. But
well, and you guys came up in an interesting time, right? There was an era when, like, to be a garage band, it meant something, right? It was this idea that you're just in your garage and you're never going to see anything outside of those four walls, right? You're going to be a garage band, and that's going to be that. A garage band nowadays is totally different, because obviously, like you just described, I mean, it can become a whole business, and we'll get more into that in a little bit. But as we were talking about just sort of risk aversion and things like that, I mean, obviously the tone of I guess the third album, Stigma, is a little bit different. But in one way, I think maybe I want to ask you, is if it's more true sort of to your early roots in sort of like indie rock. So in my take, and kind of a quick take on that album, feels much more guitar heavy. It feels much more sort of indie rock to me. And I sort of love it because it feels like old British indie to me. Yes. And so I really like it. But for people who got to know you as a pop band, for example, or as a pop rock band, it's sort of a different thing. And I just have one sort of similar example. I used to road manage this band called OPM, and OPM had a single called Heaven is a Half Pipe. And Heaven is a Half Pipe did really well. And it's kind of this little reggae jam or whatever. It got a lot of radio, all this stuff. but like it's not that similar to most of the rest of their music. And so if you got into them through that channel, right, if you came in via that song, the second album or the next album would have felt, diametrically opposed to what you were expecting. And I think a lot of bands do this as they grow and they evolve, they just change and they start to move. And so the one question I had about Stigma for you was people describe it as being darker. I don't know if maybe in theme and stuff like that, it's darker, but for me, what it was more maybe a call back to you guys trying to do something that was maybe more you before sort of the success of the related pressures of trying to live up to Unbelievable. So I wonder if you just talk a little bit about that second album and what you guys were feeling at the time.
Yeah, I mean, you are completely right. The second album is a departure and it sounds very different to the first album. But I think we were a different band. That first album was the first 10 songs we wrote. We were trying ideas out. The band hadn't really been together that long. By the time we'd made that album, we'd only done a couple of gigs. By the time we did Stigma, we'd been on tour for about a year and a half, non-stop, playing non-stop. So we were a completely different band. I think it is probably more drum heavy, guitar heavy, just the nature of us finding ourselves as a rock band. It was written differently. I mean, the first album was just me and Ian in his mum's living room with the piano and some primitive synthesizer, where the second album, we actually built a little rehearsal room where we lived in the West Country, and we'd get together and we'd play all the songs, jam all the songs out. And a lot of the songs we actually played live before we actually recorded them, which was I'm thinking these days that's kind of unheard of a little bit, but it's kind of what we did. I think whether for some reason the fans who have stuck with us really love that second album, and I think that's what they think EMF is. Whereas obviously the first album sold lots more, but the fans, it was a bit more disposable maybe, but the fans kind of went off to the next new thing, where I think people got Stigma and they really, really liked it. Yeah, it's good, but you're right. It does sound completely different.
Well, but I think the point you just made is one that like really resonates, especially for people who are fans of the band or any band for that matter. There's this, and maybe it's this natural pushback or this contrarianism or something that comes from a fan that is like, okay, well, that's the pop hit. And to your point, it is kind of disposable, right? Now you're competing with all the other top hits of the day, right? So it's whatever's top on the charts those days, where this other stuff is sort of like the old reliable, right? It's like the person you marry versus the person you date or something. It's like, this first one is the big hit is the crazy blonde that does whatever, but she's terrible and you don't really want to be around her, but she's great for eye candy. But then the one you actually settle down and marry is old reliable. And that's the one that it's not about selling a number of records or whatever, but it's the one that resonates the most with the fans or in this case, the happy husband. So, but I wonder if it's kind of that relationship, and I've been victim of that too. Once I was touring with a band called Cottonmouth Kings a million years ago, and we had a band, a little known band at the time called Linkin Park open for us. And I remember just falling in love with their music. I mean, the coolest sound, coolest everything. But by the next year, they were the biggest band on the planet. And so they went from being, really indie and really edgy and really this cool band that I knew. And then all of a sudden they've got this epic, worldwide success or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, but the old stuff's where it's at, and and it doesn't dismiss the new stuff, but it's just, there's something about the old stuff that's like, I don't know, the tried and true. This is where my heart is. And, I think, for a lot of music fans, that's kind of where they live. So, but I feel like I'm jumping around your timeline too much, but I'm trying to not spend the whole show talking about just sort of your old history.
Yeah,
but let's talk about the latest album, The Beauty and the Chaos, real quick. So you mentioned earlier a friend of yours, a guy named Ralph Jezzard, who produced that album. He produced some of the older music as well. Unfortunately, he's passed away recently, so sorry for that. But he obviously, or it seems to me anyway, in listening to the latest album, that there's a close relationship to the sort of the modern version of EMF and the old version of EMF. Your record, and I mean this in the most positive possible way, is it doesn't feel like a modern pop record, right? It still feels true to the sound of EMF. It doesn't feel like you've evolved to try and meet something. And maybe this has more to do with, being older, wiser, not feeling the crushing pressure of trying to, meet, the prior levels of some song or whatever. And to your point, it's maybe more about doing something for you. But with, I assume because of Ralph's influence, it sounds an awful lot like the old music. And for me, I really thought that was a cool thing to do, because I think so many people now are chasing TikTok or chasing whatever, and it sort of leads to formulaic music that sounds away, right? But you guys still sound like you guys after, all these years.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, I don't think we could have come back with like a dubstep record or anything. It needed to be EMF. I think once kind of got my vocals and Ian's guitars on it, it kind of makes it EMF, that sound. Ralph was a really big component. I mean, I kind of forgot how important he was on those first 2 records. He really kind of mediated between me and Ian and got that sound. He was an old punk rocker. He loved guitars, but he's also, when we first found him, he'd just done a remix for this, an artist called Silver Bullet, 20 Seconds to Comply. It was amazing. So we were just like, oh, he understands dance music, but he also understands guitars and drums and stuff like this. So yeah, I mean, we lost touch for quite a few years. Me and Ian made an album, and then we were just starting the last album. And in my mind, I thought, wouldn't it be brilliant if we could get Ralph on this? And before I even said it, Ian rang me up and he says, shall we get Ralph to do this? So it was kind of, we were just thinking the same thing. I don't know who's going to take the credit for thinking it up first.
Hey, you're here. You get credit.
Yeah, I'll take it then. So, but Ian rang up Ralph, and just so happens, because he'd spent a lot of time in Texas working at Willie Nelson's studio, bizarrely, but he was living 10 minutes around the corner from Ian's studio. So we met up, and it was just like the old days. We just clicked straight away. And it was, I often think of Ralph as the 6th member of EMF. He's such an important part. And as soon as we started doing stuff, it was just like, oh, right, this is the formula. This is why it works. So yeah, it was easy and it was really enjoyable. But unfortunately, like you said, Ryan, he passed away a few months back, which is kind of devastating because he was a friend, really good friend. But, we were looking forward to the future of making lots of music together. We thought we had it sorted. So it's a little bit of a struggle now deciding what we're going to do. I mean, we've started writing some new tunes. We've got some songs, but we could do with Ralph or a Ralph,
Yeah. No. Well, and I mean, it is true. The sound of a good producer, a good helper. Somebody who, especially in your guys' case, was there at the beginning of the thread and then also at the end. It's really useful for those people to sometimes apply their perspective. We talked about Rick Rubin earlier, and he's one of those kinds of guys. The Rick Rubin produced music kind of has I don't know what it is, the touch of God or something that comes from a guy like him. And so in the case of your guys' trajectory, Ralph Jezzard was one of those guys for you. So that's very cool. So, but I do think it did lead to a strong album. I'll say one of my favorite songs on the album is called "I've Been Down," and it's also a little bit more hard driving and stuff like that. It's actually maybe a little more reminiscent of Stigma in my mind. So it's kind of funny that was the song that I resonated to. But obviously there are a bunch of there's obviously a bunch of other songs.
Ian actually wrote that one. I remember when he presented it to me, and I was like, not quite sure about that because it's got a swing groove, hasn't it? It's quite dark.
Yeah, and it is. It's funny.
And I did say, no, we shouldn't do that. But then he came back to me a few weeks later. He goes, have another listen. And I had a listen. I was going, nah, it's good, isn't it? And at the time I says, this is going to end up being someone or many people's favorite tune off the album.
Well, and it's interesting because it is a little bit of it's a little different from the sort of upbeat electronic poppy, the Hello People, the Reach for the Lasers, these songs that are a little more like that way. But yeah, something about that sort of swingy, low key kind of, whatever it is, dark tempo is something I like. So anyway, it happened to resonate with me. So you can give Ian a little, gold star for that one. He at least got one.
I'll let him know.
That's awesome. So I want to talk a little bit about, and maybe I don't know enough about your story on this part so I'll probably need you to fill in some gaps, but just given the time that you guys came up, like we talked about earlier, there's, a stranglehold on musicians by record labels in that era. They own everything. They keep the rights. They're getting the, 98% and you're getting the 2%. And things like that. I don't know if that was your situation, but obviously it's kind of a trope from that era of record label lore. But I wonder if you talk about just sort of, with a song that so, became so wildly successful is Unbelievable. What was the ownership like back in the days? Are you guys having to do the sort of the Taylor Swift model to reclaim ownership of it? What was that like in order to, I guess, sort of keep the business of that song moving?
Well, it was a very different time. I mean, luckily we had some really good honest management. And I think that's where it kind of falls down sometimes when people start getting stitched up by managers and accountants and things. We had a really good team. It was at a time when lots of records used to sell. You know, you could sell 1 million records and make a lot of money. Where now these days you would not sell 1 million records, and you know you probably wouldn't make that much money. I think it's a lot harder now for a budding musician, to survive. We were really lucky with Unbelievable. We did. The business. I mean, there's a crazy business side of it where the actual recording royalties came up from the record label. So every time it gets used now, we use an adapted version. I don't know how much I can say about this, but it is very good because it gets used for lots of films, adverts. It's one of those songs that never goes away, Ryan, thankfully.
Yeah.
So it's been very, very good for us. And I've got lots of friends who were in bands similar to EMF, but didn't have that big hits. Oh, excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold. So yeah, I mean, we're thankful we've had it, and it was good. But like you say, it's tough now for other bands to make money.
Sure. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. Just sort of the shift in the economics of the music industry, right? Back in the olden days, or back in the sort of the early days of EMF, it was the way you made money was by selling crazy amounts of records. And I think the way that a lot of bands make money now is basically by full 360 ownership of their own business now. And they make money touring, they make money selling merchandise, they make money in those ways, you know. So it's shifted from this model where it was all about records. And in fact, sometimes the record is almost secondary to the money you're making, you know, with streaming services and things like that. Like, I mean, you've got to be in the billions to really make any money off of those platforms, or like serious money, I should say.
Totally right.
So talk a little bit about just, I mean, you've got enough breadth in the industry, and as somebody who's still active in the business, you know, how have you seen the business evolve over time? You know, what's working, what isn't, and what could be better?
Well, I'll go back to that thing about you said about the records almost being secondary. I was talking to Ian the other day, and I was just saying to Ian, we could just do with a little bit of because the records have been doing okay, but if we can just get a little bit more radio and maybe a little hit or a minor hit, the payoff will be bigger gigs. And that's where, like, touring and merchandise is kind of the way we survive. You know, it's still really expensive to go out and play on the road, like this little trip to America in next week. We will break even, but we're going to have to sell merchandise, and it's certainly not, you know, there's been a few expenses like work visas, which are not cheap, and, you know, getting out there, which isn't cheap as well. You can see why a lot of British bands don't manage to get back out to the States. But yeah, it's these days it's all about gigging and merchandise, unless, like you said, you are one of those big superstar record selling people like your Taylor Swifts or your Bryan Adams or whatever, and then you can make money. But it's tough. And again, I've got lots of friends who were similar to EMF who just can't get out on the road. It's just too expensive for them, and they can't even think of the idea of putting a band together. So it's tough.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the business is hard, and it draws a lot of parallels to sort of like the entrepreneur, and especially more so now that, you know, you basically can own every aspect of the production, you know, when you don't have sort of major label support. So, and I'm not trying to dig into you guys' pocketbooks here, so I'm not trying to be too prescriptive here, but it seems like, and this is just on its face, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but obviously a big hit like that probably buys you guys a little bit of runway to be able to start to experiment and make the transition into doing stuff on your own, as, you know, maybe record label support starts to wane and you guys start to go, you know, taking on more and more pieces of the business on your own. You know, you guys have clearly evolved, and because of maybe that one song, you had a little bit of, I guess, safety net or liberty that a lot of these bands don't have, which is, you know, trying to get going. So the point you make, especially about just touring, I follow around a Danish pop star named, and she's an amazing singer, and I just love her. And so, but she played over here in Boston a few years ago and was saying something on stage about, man, I hope I can come back, but I just don't know, you know? And so I've been having a panic attack ever since then. Yeah. But it's the cost of coming over here that makes it really hard. And so what are bands doing today, I guess, to sort of innovate, right? I mean, you can sell t-shirts, you can do things like that, but is there anything interesting that you guys have come across that is like, I don't know, a new interesting income stream, a way of, leveraging your guys' fame and recognition, things like that? Like anything unique or interesting that you've come across or that you think might work one day?
I mean, I don't know if we're the best people to ask because we're probably still a little bit old and stuck in our ways. I mean, there's certainly, you're talking to young bands and young managers and they're having great ideas about, they'll release a record, but when they sell the record, they sell the concert tickets at the same time. So everybody who buys the vinyl gets the concert ticket as well. And there's people, entrepreneurs who really understand and really know how to do all this. Social media is obviously the biggest marketing platform now. And there's people who can work those, when you kind of figure out, get the most hits. And yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely, but you probably should write and talk to someone a little bit longer in the business,
Well, I mean, you say that, but I think, so one of the things to maybe sort of dovetail into that or extend the question is that, obviously one thing that you guys have done, and I don't know if you think about it this way or in this, frame, but basically what you guys have been doing is you've been running a family business for 40 years.
Exactly.
And,
that's kind of what you have to do,
Yeah.
The job of the record label is kind of redundant a little bit. I don't think you need a record deal. You can. I mean, the good thing about the record deal was they used to give you an advance, but you don't need the big money anymore. It doesn't cost hundreds of thousands of pounds to make an album anymore. You can do it on your own with some simple equipment that you got, a little Mac laptop. You can make an amazing sounding record. So you don't need the big advances from the record label. And then the record labels all used to have in-house marketing as well. But you can be creative and do your own marketing. And if you do need a little bit of help, you can just get a radio plugger and pay someone, an independent record label plugger or an independent marketer, to do some digital marketing. So I think, I don't know if record labels are still, I wouldn't say, it used to be in the old days, it was like, right, we're going to put a band together, get a record deal. That was the goal. But I don't think you really need to do that now.
Yeah, it seems like it's definitely applicable to maybe that top 1%. And they seem to be the bands that the record label themselves are just most interested in from like a business standpoint. They just think they can sell a Beyonce or a Taylor Swift.
Yes.
Everybody that's sort of downstream from those guys, I don't think gets the kind of shine that they used to, which was, the tour support and the, financial support to record a record or things like that. And I'm sure there are cases, but.
Yeah. But it's really interesting, the thing you're on about risk as well. Those big record labels will not take any risk because what they do now is they used to have an A&R and scouts who used to go and watch bands in clubs and stuff like that, but they don't do that now. All they do is look at your Spotify and see what your stats are on Spotify. And if you're getting lots of hits or if you've got an amazing Instagram, lots of followers, and then they'll take notice, which is really strange, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's funny. I was talking to, so I follow this, they're a Mexican rock band, these three sisters called The Warning. And I was speaking with their manager in Amsterdam last year. And he was saying, I was like, hey, you guys should come to Salt Lake. We'd love to see you. We've got a big Hispanic population. You guys are from Mexico. It seems like it would work, right? And he told us that basically the way they choose their dates is based on Spotify traffic. And so it's like, so if they have a lot of listens from Salt Lake City, then they'll book a show here. If they don't, then they won't. And in their case, they didn't. And so they don't. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting thing because, to your point, I mean, it's the metrics that are driving everything. I think the model used to be that you just wanted to play every major market and hopefully you'd get on the radio and hopefully you'd meet the DJs and hopefully, because like you just wanted to spread the word sort of organically.
Yes. Yeah.
But now everything is so socially driven and, metric driven, I guess, that it sort of changed the whole dynamic of the way bands tour and the way bands play. And I guess it's not a bad idea. I mean, you're probably hedging your bets to some extent, right? You're going, okay, well, I have an audience in that town already. So, I mean, I guess it's safe. But I do think, I mean, and maybe it's just me being old too, or like an old music fan, but it's like, I don't know, but part of the fun was meeting these little bands in little markets years ago, I mean, I saw Incubus in my hometown of Pocatello, Idaho, at a place called the Roach Motel that was literally just like an empty auto garage, and there was 30 people in the room and we got to see those guys. Right. But nowadays it would have been like, oh, well, we're not seeing any numbers on Spotify in Pocatello, Idaho. So I guess we'll go somewhere else, And so I think that for people who are really into music discovery and uncovering sort of, hidden gems and being the guy who was at the show early, or catching up with a band that becomes something one day and meeting them early, it's I don't know, they're missing out on this opportunity. I always joke, like with my kids, just like when it comes down to like music, everything is kind of disposable now. Everything is through Spotify, and it's they get a new track every couple days. There's something new, and we're back in the old days, or like even just in my era. I had my $20 and I'd show up at the record store and I could buy one, and there were 10 releases that day. So which record was I going to buy, and who had the coolest artwork, and who had the best liner notes, or, who would hide the image behind the CD tray or whatever, you know what I mean? It's like, so there were all these cool, tangible facets of getting into music back then. And I think some of that's been lost. I think you can get it through, live music and things like that now, but it's, but those are all the things that I look at my kids and I just go, man, you guys are missing out on all that stuff.
Yeah, totally. You're so right. So right. There's something really good about the live band experience of going to something and seeing something real instead of just looking at phones and TikTok and the digital world. So, hey, maybe it may come back. There may be a twist.
Well, I mean, you're starting to see it with vinyl, right? I mean, obviously vinyl has come back to life. Everybody's buying vinyl. And, I think I write on this topic a lot, which is this notion of technological saturation, that, people get tired of pressing fake buttons and would like to press a real button every now and then. And, that's where you get like these beard oils and craft beer and things like that, but also to your point, it's live music. Like, I know I take my kids to concerts and things. So it's like when they go to concerts, they get this big visceral reaction from the band. And, we saw the Black Keys a couple of years ago, and I had my then 12-year-old son with me. And, but we got great seats right up front so he could really watch the musicians play. And, if you've seen the Black Keys, they're pretty incredible musicians, and they, are a lot of fun to watch because they're just really talented people. And so, you can really just watch them and it's like watching an artist paint or something, it's very cool. And so for my son, he's not the biggest Black Keys fan. He's 14 now. He's listening to a lot of really, really bad rap music. And, but, that moment was still really cool for him because, just to see somebody do, I guess, exercising their craft or expressing themselves in that way, I think is a really valuable thing.
Yeah, totally.
So let's just kind of keep going with sort of the business theme around sort of Unbelievable. Obviously, I mean, we talked about it, that you guys have been running this, family business for 40 years. You guys have managed to keep that, let's just frame it as a product, right? The product of Unbelievable has been something that you guys have been able to license out, use in numerous ways for commercial reasons, whether it's in a movie or in an ad, even whole ad campaigns sort of based on the song's name and things like that. Can you talk about just sort of keeping that product alive? I think a lot of people, especially artists, have sort of this, I guess, you get used to, or, maybe you get tired of the song. Like you hear the song all the time and it's like you're being beaten to death with this song. But at the same time, it's your product, right? I mean, it's probably no different from somebody selling a widget, and, your widget sells really well. So you have to keep selling that widget, even if you it wouldn't be your wish. Can you talk about just kind of keeping that alive for 40 years and what that's been like?
Well, to be honest with you, we don't actively push it or go searching and putting it and placing it in adverts and stuff like that. Thankfully, the song just speaks for itself and does its own thing. It's really strange. Sometimes it goes really quiet where it doesn't get used for a few years. And then all of a sudden, it'll start getting used again. It'll pop up in a Disney film, or like a car advert might use it in Europe, or an Australian car company. So it's definitely ebbs and flows, but it's definitely not a case of me and Ian sitting here going, we should push this here. I don't think that'd work. Thankfully, it's just kept alive itself. It's really strange. It's had such a long life, and the song is more popular in the band really. Sorry, I have got a cold. I'm really suffering. Is it hot in Salt Lake City?
It is warm. Yep, it'll be nice when you get here.
It's almost winter here still.
Yeah, it'll be hot and dry. So, you'll have different problems, but you'll be all dried out here.
Oh, right. Okay, that's good. So yeah, I mean, we're really lucky. It would have been amazing to have another 5 songs like that, and then I would have been like, in a yacht on the Med or something.
That's right. You'd be calling in from sea right now.
Yeah, I would.
So, and I think you guys did have a few other sort of minor hits. I think, yeah. So it's so obviously, I mean, there's been some other things, but
yeah, I mean, Lies was the second single, and I think it went I'm going to say top 20, but I'm not sure. And I think by the time we did the second album, it was such a contrast to the stuff before. I think it confused the American market. It confused the British market as well. There wasn't any like standout singles and big hits from that. But certainly in the UK, we had, quite a few top 40 and top 20 hits.
Well, and it is hard when music evolves like that, to your point, just especially about like an American market, where we're so inundated with so many different things. I was a big Elastica fan early on for those guys. I used to love their band, and, but by their, they had sort of their big album, and then the next album, like it was enough different that I wasn't into it anymore. Right. There were enough other things for me to get into, so as much as I love that album, I still listen to that album today.
I did some mixes on that the second album. Because
did you really? There's some great songs on there. There's some bangers. Don't get me wrong, but that first album was like impactful.
Enough. I'm really good friends with Elastica.
Oh, are you really?
Justin, the drummer, is the godfather to my kids. So
funny. Yeah, no, that's awesome. Well, you're gonna have to put us in touch. If this hasn't been too horrible, maybe you put us in touch with some people. But no.
Talk to you. He actually plays for Jesus and Mary Chain at the moment. Do you remember Jesus and Mary Chain?
Yeah.
So he's out.
Oh, that's awesome.
Them. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, let's fast forward a little bit. We're starting to get long in the interview. So let's talk a little bit about today and what's going on today. So you guys are in the process of, nearly ready to come to the States and hopefully warm up and dry out. And, you're going on the road with another English band, Spacehog, who I sort of also love from that era. So I'm really excited about this tour. You want to talk a little bit about just sort of like the makings of that tour, how it came to be and why now?
I don't know how it came about. I mean, last year we did a little stint over to the East Coast, which was pretty full on because we kind of flew in, did a festival, and then a gig in Chicago and a gig in Detroit. We had no time off. Honestly, it was 3 gigs in 3 days. So we basically got off the plane, went and did a gig, and then we finished the last gig and then got back on a plane again. I'm hoping that the West Coast this time, we've actually got 2 gigs, 1 day off. So hopefully a bit more relaxed. And get to see the country and hang out in Salt Lake City, which would be amazing. It's been such a long time. I don't know. I'm really looking forward to playing with Spacehog. They look really cool. I don't really know much about them, so I'm looking forward to getting to know them and seeing them every night. And I think it's going to be good. I've got a good feeling about it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And I think you guys' music will play together nicely. I mean, obviously you guys have a more maybe an electric bent, or you're a little bit more synthy than they are, or at least in what I remember of them.
Yeah.
But but they think will play really nicely with you guys. And in fact, I'm super excited to see it. I mean, both obviously you guys are both sort of that era, which for people like me is like, okay, this is great. We love this stuff.
Yeah.
And but I'm excited to see sort of. You guys, just like them, have, kept the music going, different things. And they sort of had the same experience where they had one massive hit and then proceeded to do some other things. And so it's, so I think there's some similarities in you guys just personality wise, but I think also it's going to be exciting to see just sort of musically how the two fuse, because it's enough different that I think it'll be unique. And I think it's going to make for some fun crowds.
Good. Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Come and say hello at Salt Lake City.
Absolutely. Well, so let's talk a little bit about just sort of, I guess, the future of things. We talked a little bit earlier about, you've recently released an album in 2024. What are you guys working on now? You said you've got some new music, I assume some new merch, all those kinds of things going on. What are you guys thinking for the future?
Right. Well, we've got some interesting things in the pipeline. We are writing some new songs. We actually rehearsed day before yesterday, and then we decided to put some of the new songs in the set, or at least try a new song occasionally on some of the nights, which we've not done for a while. We've got some interesting stuff. We're going over to Ireland, Cork in Ireland, to work with some big band and some jazz people. That's getting filmed for Irish TV over there. We've got like a BBC documentary that's just coming out. There's lots of things. The band's really grown organically over the last couple of years. And then another big UK tour in October. So there's lots on the calendar and lots in the diary.
So, and what are you guys doing? So back in 92, this is forever ago, but you guys donated an unbelievable remix to an AIDS benefit.
Yeah.
That was sort of, I guess, maybe one of the early times that you guys sort of were doing maybe sort of social change or being interested in social change, or we're in maybe in a position to get involved in that sort of thing. What do you
Yeah.
guys do today? Or like, do you guys use your music in ways like that where you have some social causes and things like that you're promoting, or what's happening for you guys on sort of the charity side?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just a natural getting older, lyrical content. It's a bit more socially aware of what's going on. We've actually got a new single coming out next month, which Greenpeace are picking up on, and it's just a message about right to protest because they're kind of trying to bring, there's just little things going on in the UK. I can't even imagine what American politics is like at the moment, but
Yeah, I heard somebody say yesterday, which was kind of funny. I thought they were like, do you think people sit back and watch American politics and just eat popcorn and watch this thing go down, And so, and my response, because it was my wife who told me this, my response to her was like, well, yeah, but have you seen everywhere else's politics too? It's like, so for the people, for like you guys in the UK, and obviously I heard some of the samples that you use on the new album that are sort of talking about some of these political things that are going on in England at the time. And so I thought it was kind of funny, but I was like, do you guys even have time to pay attention to what we're doing? Because there's so much going on your end.
Well, I don't know. I mean, American politics is pretty big. That's kind of fascinating as well. But yeah, you're right. There is lots going on in our own country and around Europe as well. So,
well, and music has always been one of those things,
Yeah, we do our bits. I think naturally artists and musicians and bands always kind of use their voice a little bit. There's certainly a lot more bands are a lot more politically on it at the moment.
Well, it's an interesting time. Well, it's an interesting time in that, right? Because to your point, I mean, yes, of course, musicians are, historically famous for aligning themselves with one political cause or another and getting involved with that. So obviously this is something that, music has always been a big part of and responded to. But I think you're right that there seems to be a little bit of an increase. And this probably has something to do with sort of access to music and the fact that you can create your music more easily and you can spread it around more easily nowadays.
Yeah.
And, so I suspect that maybe all these people would have just been hiding out in the closet and gone and started a day job, but now they have a little more opportunity to get out and express themselves publicly. So I think it is a really powerful time, but I see what you're saying, right? I can recognize sort of the increase in this too, or maybe
and there is a lot wrong with the world, which makes it, there's a lot to shout about and sing about, isn't there?
Yeah, nope, it's true. And like we were talking about earlier with social media and everything, I think we're more exposed than ever to all the problems of the world.
Yeah. Yeah, we see it.
I mean, I have no doubt that these things all happened around the world, for years and years and years, but we certainly have more exposure today. And so I think the fact that we're getting more and more voices and more people who can, share a message of positivity or whatever their message is, I think is probably a good thing at large.
Yeah, definitely.
So, one other thing I just kind of want to do with you real quick before I let you go here is just take a moment to kind of reflect. And I want to maybe focus on some of the, the key takeaways from your career, sort of as a musician, but also as a business person, even if you don't really see yourself that way. You've been an artist, you have run, what most of us would call, if you're able to live off your music, that's a successful business, right? It may not be a Google, but it's as somebody who's self-employed myself, as long as I can keep feeding my family, it's a success, right? And so over your career, which has obviously spanned all this time from the really early years as a young man, in sort of a music scene that was probably pretty wild and all this stuff, to now you being, older in your 50s, you have now this new lens or this new perspective for life. Can you talk about just any like sort of key learnings along the way or takeaways that, you couldn't have gotten to any other way than through this rowdy life?
Yeah, I think I kind of wish, as far as performing and being in a band, I wish I'd enjoyed it a little bit. I wish I wasn't so... I found it, I did find it quite an uncomfortable experience being in a band at the start, just because I was so young and not much confidence, and it took quite a while to grow into myself. Because this is a business podcast, that's really interesting, because you never really think about some of the business things that I wish I'd been a little bit more shrewd. Easy to get through a lot of money, and particularly when the band ended, I must have lived for like over 15 years just on income from back then and blowing it, where I wish I'd bought houses and invested it, which is but you can't tell a young person that, can you? You know what I
No,
mean?
of course not. Well, and it's one of those points that you hear, with professional sports or anybody who's sort of young and comes into money. You need those. I mean, you said that you guys had some honest leadership at the record label, which is great, but I don't even think it occurred to people that, you should be getting financial advice and you should be having all these people help you set up for the future. Understanding that for most bands, if they do hit, it is a small window somewhere along the way. You don't get too many bands that hit on every record,
No, not at all.
and so
Yeah,
teaching musicians how to manage their money would have been a great thing for them to offer back then.
yeah. A life is a long time. The best thing, the best thing that ever happened was a management at that time, after we made some money from Unbelievable, give me a lump sum and just says, go and buy a house now. And that kind of, thankfully, I bought a house in the middle of London, in the middle of Camden, which kind of it's kind of sort of seen me okay years later. Obviously, I live in the countryside now, and it's kind of quite nice. But I did actually go back to work. So it's not like I've been a professional musician my whole life. I actually went back and did a teaching degree and went and became a school teacher. And it's only recently that I've become a professional musician again. So
Yeah. Well, and as I understand
I know
it,
the side of it.
I think it's actually kind of interesting. As I understand it, from what I understood or what I read, your teaching is in and around sort of software technologies and things like that people can employ in music. And it's something that I think has always been interesting about sort of I don't know if you want to call them like the electronic bands or whatever, the guys that always work with the the synthesizers and the computers and all this kind of stuff. But you guys are really technologists, right? You're out there on the cutting edge of this stuff. And the guy's name is I can't remember this dude's name. We had a guy on the podcast who works for Avid and is their big software guy. Like he's their live music guy. And so he, we had a in-depth conversation with him about just sort of the software of entertainment, and how all that works. And so, but for guys like you, I think there's plenty of dudes that just noodle on a guitar that never really have this depth of knowledge around technology and things like that. So maybe unbeknownst to you guys, you actually set yourself up for a future in technology and being able to relay this information onto kids as both a creative person, but also a technologist.
Yeah, totally, totally. It's funny, isn't it? Those years in recording studios, those were years making records. You've gained lots of skills and they're transferable skills. So like I said, it was quite nice to go back into education and give a little bit back. Yeah, it's been good.
Well, and as a guy in a band too, you've become a marketer. You've become a guy that knows how to handle logistics on merchandise. You guys, so to your point, there are a lot of transferable skills there.
Yeah, totally. I didn't really think about it, but yeah, a lot going on.
Well, James, thanks so much. Let me, I just want to go through a couple of the dates. You've got 11 cities with Spacehog here in the States starting June 14th in San Jose. Got San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, my hometown, Salt Lake City, Denver, Colorado, Phoenix, Arizona, San Diego, Santa Ana, LA, and Las Vegas to cap it off. I think you also have some other shows coming up this year. I think I saw something, a battle with
Jesus Jones.
That's right, with Jesus Jones and something like that. So do you want to talk about just sort of anything else that's coming up this year, how people can, check out the new music, maybe see you guys perform?
I think the big thing at the moment is getting over to the States and doing these 11 dates. I mean, it's quite a big thing for us. It's been over 30 years since we've been to the West Coast. So that is kind of the dream. I wouldn't have thought a few years back we'd be going back over and playing in places like Salt Lake City. Had such amazing times back then all those years ago. So that's our big thing. We are living the dream.
Yeah. Well, you say it's a little like winter where you're at right now. Well, it's going to be a lot like summer in this mid-June in all of those cities. So bring your cool weather mentality because you're going to be sweltering hot, but you will dry out. So that'll be good. So hopefully you get feeling better. Well, anyway, thanks so much, James. I really appreciate you taking the time to sit and visit with me and catch up on the old and talk about the new. And I'm really excited to see you guys. We'll obviously come out and see you on June 20th in Salt Lake. So anybody who listens to the show and wants to come out, we'll see you there. Yeah, I mean, anything else, James? Like, where can people find your music? Where's the best place for them to go?
I've really enjoyed the podcast, Ryan. It's quite unusual, and I know you were a little bit worried about just firing the same questions that I get asked all the time. And it was really interesting to have someone think about the business side of it because I never really think about that, and how the workings of it all goes on. So it's been really nice to reflect on that and hopefully give you a little bit of background and some useful.
Yeah, no, it's been amazing, and we actually call ourselves a creativity podcast first.
Yeah.
Like, so if people ask, we talk about creativity, and this episode will be number 418. So you're technically the 418th CEO that we've talked to.
I like that.
In all that time, what we've discovered is that the thing that makes you make music, whatever this creative juice is, or whatever this thread is the same thing that is acted on by a CEO or an executive or a startup founder or whatever. It's the same juice. It's just in how we apply it, right? And so really, I see business as being an act of creativity, not just a business. And that's, I think, outside of just our music fandom, mine and Mike's, who couldn't be here today, but outside of just being music fans, I think that that's part of what draws us to it. Like I run a marketing agency. I'm an artist, illustrator, designer, and so for me, I'm actually the worst business guy. I'm much better at being creative, but we spend a lot of time around business people, so we try and sound authoritative. But nonetheless, it's it really is about creativity, and I think that's why musicians and artists of all varieties really do well on the show. Is just that I don't think a lot of them see themselves in that lens, but really what you're doing is running a business, right? So it's kind of an interesting take, I think. So cool. Well, anyway, that's it. James, what's the website? Where can people hear the music? And we'll make sure to share all the dates.
EMFtheman.com and then EMF on the socials. And look forward to seeing everybody in the next few
Excellent.
weeks.
And I think it's EMF hyphen the band. So if anybody's looking for it, that's where you find it. Also, yeah, of course, on all the social platforms and all that stuff. We'll list in the show notes all the tour dates, and hopefully you can get out and see the guys while they're over here. It'd be really great. So thanks so much, James. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much. Take care. And thanks so much to everybody who listens to the show this week and every week. And we'll see you guys next time.
The UN urged the UK to tackle hate speech, fears built up over decades. There is consensus among economists that immigration is good for Britain's economy. And when we meet immigrants, we lose our fear.